But the story to start this hour, and this is a political beast who's been, well, pretty much at the forefront for more than 4 decades, formerly Michael, now Lord Heseltine, indeed former Deputy Prime Minister, it should be said. In an interview with The Independent, I don't know quite what reasoning, whether he just decided he wanted to unburden himself, he says British people may be so wealthy they lack the national will needed to secure an economic recovery. Let me ask you a question. You got any problems this I don't mean health problems, and I don't mean family problems. I mean economic problems. Have you got any economic problems this morning? Financial woes or concerns? Because, and this is a very, very crude summation, a ridiculously crude summation of what Heseltine is saying, Lord Heseltine is saying. But essentially, we're all fine here. The country ticks over. We don't really have the gumption or the drive to make it any better. It's not like we're living, say, in India or China, where they really are. They've got, quotes, real problems. We don't have real problems here. We're a bit too rich to push. So it can just carry on. We don't really care. Is that how you feel this morning? Dan Atkinson is the economics editor for the Mail on Sunday, joins me now. Has he put his finger on it in your view, Dan? Dan, can you hear me? Let's instead go to Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and wealth manager for Jonathan Davis Wealth Management, joins me now. Can you hear me, Mr. Davis? Can anybody hear anybody at all today? Have we lost everybody? Let me read you a little bit more of what the interview has while we try and sort that out. He's now 80, by the way. As I say, he's been for 4 decades. He's been at the very prime of it. He talks about how the country is drifting economically, but he says it's not essential. It doesn't need to. It can go on drifting down. There's no God-given rule saying you've got to have a well-performing economy, and he says that we just really need to have the economic will. Let's try Dan Atkinson with the Mail on Sunday again. Dan, can you hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
OK, sir. Is Lord Heseltine on to something here?
Yes, I think he is. We may have sort of reached a plateau where we don't have that hunger that he was talking about in India and China to improve our lot, and people may be happy with a long period of mediocre economic performance. I think he may well be absolutely right. Yeah,
it's sometimes since I've been through India. I'm sad to say I've never been through China. If I was to go there, what might I see?
Well, as Lord Heseltine said, you would see living standards unrecognisable from our own. The fact that these countries economically, in aggregate, are getting richer is fairly meaningless when you notice that they have enormous populations, and that when you spread the money around, there isn't very much of it. So yeah, their living standards, as Lord Heseltine said, they're no relation to ours at all.
He also talks in a way about a sort of economic divided Britain and how the poorest parts of the country tend to be the least aspirational and dynamic, and those of us who are doing well simply seem to want more. How fair is that?
I'm sure there's something in that. People do, regions can get demoralised. He probably knows more about that than I do, because he was famously sort of Minister for Inner City Regeneration among his many other jobs. I'm sure he's right. I'm sure they do get demoralised. And, success breeds success, and if you're living in Virginia Water or Croydon and you've got a good job, maybe your ambition is still fairly fired up. Of course, there's a slight contradiction there. He's saying that we're well off, so we don't want any more, but some of us do. I mean, so these are generalisations, but yeah, I think he's certainly onto something.
Thank you for that, Dan. Sorry about trouble getting through to you earlier. John, let's try Jonathan Davis again now. Jonathan is an economist and wealth manager for Jonathan Davis Wealth Management. So no one's really got economic woes or problems out there, Jonathan Davis?
In fact, we have big woes. I think actually it's a problem of perception. It's a lack of understanding of what problems we actually have, and I think the politicians of all colours, and indeed the media, has got a lot to play here. People don't realise what dire state of our finances we're in. £51 billion a year is what the government spends on interest on debt. 51 billion. So, they talk about austerity, the austerity government. Nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is we're spending so much on accumulated debt interest. That's the reason why we're starting to spend less on public services. And whatever government is going to be in place in the future, it will be the same for them, because whether or not interest rates rise, which actually in due course they probably will, because we're borrowing more and more and more just to keep that hamster spinning on the wheel, we're going to be spending more and more just on interest and less on health and education, on pensions, you name it.
So what message should the government take from what Lord Heseltine is saying?
I think there needs to be an education process and a policy of honesty. The politicians from all sides have been entirely disingenuous with us for decades. On one side of the political divide, they say we need growth, and on the other side, they say we're trying to get growth. Do you know what? With £1,100 billion of debt, which costs us, let's say, over $50 billion a year in interest, you can't get growth until there's a radical change in policies. So the politicians need to fess up that they've been over-promising to us for decades.
So it's not
and
the people...
The chickens are now coming home to roost.
So in a sentence, Jonathan Davis, it's not the people perhaps lacking the drive or the will, as Lord Heseltine says, it's the politicians.
Absolutely, it's a brilliant way of putting it.
All right, thank you for your time, Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager. And now over to you. You've got no real financial problems, says Lord Heseltine. There's nothing really to worry about. You haven't got the will, or to use his phrase, you're too rich to push the country out of its economic problems. Is he, pardon this, on the money?
Nick Ferrari at